The forests of our planet are something to be marveled at, protected, and respected. With their expansive swaths of trees, rivers, creeks, rocky outcroppings, and fields, to the species that live within, forming a complex ecosystem of predator-prey interactions, it's just something that happens on a daily basis. As humans, we know we don't want to really get caught up in that cycle. Our species has virtually conquered this planet for the most part, and because of that, we have intentionally chosen areas that we leave alone due to the fact that they're beautiful, and with it, nature continues running on with the same cycle it has since the beginning. But because of these areas being largely untouched by human hands, things may still exist out there that we're not really commonly familiar with. It's a tale as old as time, really. Much like when the Europeans came over during the push to colonize the recently discovered landmass, the natives didn't know what to think of these fair-skinned people. In some ways, it's possible that they thought they were gods. Over time, however, it became apparent that these people were in fact not gods and just another form of human. This sentiment would actually begin to change as things kind of got worse from there. But that's the point. When you first encounter something, you may think it to be otherworldly or even supernatural in some ways. But is it really? Or is it just something much more mundane? As the Europeans continued to come over from across the pond, they would begin to settle into the landscape where they actually got a reversal of sorts. See, the native people of North and South America were very well aware of the landscape, nature, and animals that surrounded them, but the newcomers were not. What seems natural to the people that have already lived here would seem paranormal to those who just arrived. Really, what it comes down to is perspective and what you deem to be a naturally occurring event. This, in the last few decades, well, maybe 7 to 10 decades to be exact, things have kind of begun to shift so wildly to steady and predictable that there seems to be no more mysteries left in our world. But that's likely never been further from the truth. As our cities expanded further and further outwards, pushing the limits of our infrastructure, people would begin moving outwards from these pockets of concrete and steel and begin to form the suburban areas that were sparsely populated at first, but still kind of more populated than a rural area. Over time, these suburban areas have begun to look more and more like cities of just a few hundred years ago as people continue to push out even further past that into rural areas to get away from others, myself included, one day. This has predictably put a squeeze on the native fauna of an area as human activity continues to increase, but this has also led to interactions people would assume to be impossible. There is a statement that I think applies to our species in a big way and should be used when approaching information, or new information anyhow. Knowledge can be broken down to this: 1% is what you know, 2% is what you know you don't know, and 97% is what you don't know that you don't know. Regardless of human expansion on this rock, we have pretty much since the beginning not known very much, which is why we are so curious about everything going on around us. And in some ways, this is like fantastic, as it put us in the current position that we are, which is just dominating the entire planet. But it also has led to encounters that have absolutely horrified people to their core. Enter the Michigan Dogman. I know whoever came up with that name, that is like just beautiful descriptive powers of like Ernest Hemingway. But shade on the name aside, the Michigan Dogman is something of an enigma based on the encounters that people have had with it, or even spotting it in general. In the lore of this cryptid, the Michigan Dogman is said to inhabit the Northwest Quadrant of Michigan. It should be noted that Canadians as well have their own form of like the Michigan Dogman, and I guess is it Wisconsinites? Yeah, probably Wisconsinites. They also have theirs, which may hint that this is an endemic species residing within the forests of this area, but we'll get there soon enough. This animal, or potentially group of animals, is said to have been spotted many times in the region, and actually more so than sightings of Bigfoot have been confirmed. The stories surrounding this creature reach all the way back to the 1800s, but actually that's just more of a modern view of history, because even still further past that, as when the natives were in the area, they've seen it and understood it as a real creature. However, its interactions with people have seemingly been non-confrontational, at least for the most part, but you have to take that with a grain of salt, as the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. So let's start from the beginning, shall we? But before moving on, I want to say thank you for all the support on the channel. I never expected it to grow the way it has in just the last few months, and it's absolutely been beyond anything that I deserve. It definitely keeps me motivated juggling both channels to keep uploading and bringing you guys these stories. So again, thank you very much, but let's get to it. The Michigan Dogman is said to be a lot of things. Some say it's a form of werewolf that stalks with other werewolves in the Manistee Forest, spreading out into the surrounding territory that it continues to hunt in order for its survival. This pack that it hunts with isn't actually just bipedal dogs running around either. It is said that some of these dogs within the pack actually are just regular four-legged animals, while one has been cited as standing upright on two legs. Others seem to think that this is clearly a bear based on apparent photos of the creature, and this is a more based explanation, and maybe more in line with reality, because I want you to remember a few things. First, when people are scared, they can easily misremember things and misidentify things as well. There was an argument actually in my Portlock video, which I'll mention again in a minute, but people were saying, oh, well, you expect hunters not to know the difference between like a hybrid bear and a Bigfoot. And it's like, yeah, actually, when people are scared, they completely screw up describing something. And on top of that, I just want to point out, bear tracks can absolutely look like Bigfoot tracks. Just throwing that out there. Anyways, we're going to move on past that. But this is why the events like a robbery, also for instance, the eyewitnesses who said that they've seen something and are questioned thoroughly about it, and the reason they're questioned thoroughly about it is because eyewitness accounts have been overturned by video evidence before. Our brain can piece together things that aren't actually there. It's just kind of what we do. The second, anyone who has actually not seen a bear and then sees one for the first time may end up thinking that it's something it's not, because what they are witnessing up close and personal conflicts with what they had in their mind's eye. But even still, the bear explanation does not wholly satisfy the conditions that people have laid out for what they have seen. Even further back, there is another explanation as to what may be going on in the Manistee Forest. The people of the Ottawa tribe, and it's O-D-A-W-A, not Ottawa, which is with T's, they've lived in the area for hundreds of years. Having moved to this area during the 17th century when Europeans began landing on the East Coast, they would remain within the area near the Great Lakes and rivers that flowed to and from to sort of trade, hunt, and survive as everyone else was doing during this time frame. Seeing as they were in a vast wilderness, setting up their settlements which started small and continued to grow in size, the animals they would encounter were fairly typical, just deer, bears, and the occasional gray wolf. Pretty standard. That is until you begin to learn that they actually saw another animal out there, and they were quite aware of it, that it was running around the woods, and they also feared this as well. This would be the same animal that others would see and have the same sentiment, and this is the Dogman. The Dogman is described in several different ways depending on who you ask. The creature is largely unknown, but for those who do see it, they have said the creature stands between 5 feet 8 inches all the way up to over roughly 10 feet tall. The discrepancy within the height does not discount that it still may be real. It's just possible those who have seen it have seen different specimens of Dogman entirely, which we'll get into the eyewitness accounts in a moment, and kind of some conflicting information. Oh, and for all the rest on the planet still utilizing the archaic metric system, I know, who does that? That is 1.72 meters to over 3 meters tall. The Dogman is said to have either piercing blue eyes, or it may be amber in color or yellow entirely. The creature can walk on two legs, much like a human can, and has a relatively fairly human torso, but the face is a fearsome canine. While its appearance is horrifying enough, it is said the worst part about it is the howl that it emits. Unlike a wolf howl, which would be typical and what you might expect from this thing, it has a very much so human scream, but able to go beyond what our bodies are capable of producing. The Dogman range in sightings is actually kind of expansive. While mostly seen in the lower Northwest Quadrant of Michigan, it also, as touched on earlier, has been seen in Canada as well as Wisconsin. And you may ask yourself, why hasn't Wisconsin taken the peninsula from Michigan considering it's on the other side of the lake? Well, I think that's because Wisconsin is just totally weak. Anyways, the encounter was actually known to inspire the book called The Beast of Bray Road. The Beast of Bray Road, also known as Bray Road Beast and the Wisconsin Werewolf, is a purported humanoid wolf-like creature allegedly witnessed in or near the rural community of Elkhorn, Walworth County, Wisconsin. It has since become part of the Wisconsin folklore and has been subject to multiple books, documentaries, and a 2005 horror film. Named for the farm road in which it was purportedly sighted, reports of the creature in the 1980s and 1990s prompted a local newspaper, the Walworth County Week, to assign reporter Linda Godfrey to cover the story. Godfrey was initially skeptical, but later became convinced of the sincerity of the witnesses. Her series of articles later became a book titled The Beast of Bray Road, tailing Wisconsin's werewolf. The Beast of Bray Road was most often described by alleged witnesses as large, between about 6 feet, or 1.8 meters tall, and 7 feet, 2.1 meters tall, with a humanoid-style body covered in fur or hair, and with a head resembling a wolf or a bear. It is purported to have been seen moving as both a quadruped and a biped, and some reports describe it as more closely resembling a traditional werewolf or Bigfoot. The creature was allegedly first sighted in 1936, and in the 1980s, several alleged witnesses reported that the beast had made contact with their vehicles, leaving long scratch marks on the doors and trunks of their vehicles. One witness stated she hit something while crossing Bray Road. Upon exiting her vehicle to determine what she had hit, supposedly a large wolf-like creature with red eyes chased her back to her car, leaving claw marks on the rear passenger door. Sightings have also been reported during the daylight hours, with several witnesses stating they observed an unusually large wolf-like creature running on all fours through the cornfields. One stated the creature was in pursuit of a deer. Animal mutilations have also been reported in the area around Bray Road, with animal remains, including deer and livestock, partially eaten, with a specific organ removed from the animal carcasses. Another witness reported driving down Bray Road late one night and observed an unusually large wolf-like creature eating an animal which had been hit by a car on the side of the road. The creature reportedly ran into the woods as the eyewitnesses approached it in their vehicle. Reported sightings continue, most recently in February of 2018 and July of 2020, where alleged witnesses observed a large hair-covered upright creature in Spring Prairie and lions, both in Walworth County. The Dogman is said to have also specific times when it will be spotted, which is kind of fairly odd based on the accounts of this creature being spotted, but falling in line with this pattern. The Michigan Dogman will appear about every 10 years in a 10-year cycle as the years fall on 7. So the next scheduled sighting of the Dogman should take place in 2027. If you can get this channel to 1 million subscribers by then, I will 100% go to Manistee Forest and attempt to find the Dogman, probably in June of 2027. Of course, based on what's been said, that might attract the attention of certain organizations in a bad way, but the deal still stands. Moving on, the rest of these creatures is a relatively unknown, but the interactions with it began to increase, and with it, so did the descriptions. The first who were to actually know about this creature were the Ottawa tribe members, as mentioned previously. Having been in the area for quite some time, they described the creature as belonging to another tribe of shape-shifting skinwalkers. If you know anything about skinwalkers, they are horrifying. For those who don't, skinwalkers are essentially a human who can take on the form of any other animal that they'd like to. This can be highly valuable for them, as should they need to hunt, they can go and track down animals with increased senses. However, I will say this. Humanity is always going to be number one in the game when it comes to running down animals, seeing as we are persistent hunters. Honestly, if you think about it, humans are probably the cryptids to animals, because imagine getting chased by something and you can outrun it, it's not that big of a deal, so you lay down to rest only for it to show up again and again and again until you are so exhausted you cannot run any further, and then it takes you out. Anyhow, the Dogmen of Michigan, they're described by this tribe as those who somehow got stuck midway through their transition and possess both characteristics of a human and a wolf that they were trying to turn into. This would actually make sense based on what we will talk about here in a moment. These people who got stuck apparently literally got stuck, and for some reason they cannot return to their human form, nor can they fully transition into a wolf form. Because of this, they possess both qualities, but the question that would have to be asked is, what does it look like for their lifespan? If this person was really just changing and it was one person, then how is it over hundreds of years it has still been spotted more than once? Regardless, that was the first explanation. From here, some of them either tend to change their appearance slightly or drastically, but either way it shows the immense strength and speed that these creatures have. Another sighting would take place in 1887 in Wexford County. It is said that a few men had gone out to work in the woods as they were lumberjacks. While they were there, however, they would begin hearing a noise moving through the woods, as well as something that almost sounded human but distorted. They would call out to it and then they would spot it. A little ways away from them, they would see this creature walking on two legs that obviously had the shape of a man's body, but the head of a dog in a snarling, teeth-baring way. Obviously, that would have been rather concerning to the men, and they clearly lived to tell the tale, so the question is, what did they actually see? 50 years later, another sighting would take place. This one may help to explain what the Ottawa we're talking about. In Paris, Michigan, a man would be attacked by a pack of wild dogs in 1937. As the wild dogs descended upon him, the man would begin fighting for his life, but he would go on to say one of the dogs looked completely different from the others. This dog, unlike the rest, was walking on two legs and was clearly a part of the group of canines. The man would go on to survive the encounter, but if his story is to be believed, this would mean the Dogman does in fact attack humans. However, how you survive a 7-foot-tall Dogman attacking you, that's beyond me. I mean, I guess swing away, Meryl, but I would have thought it kind of sounds like fear warping your perception, but If it did go down exactly as described, that would mean that potentially he was attacked by a pack of shapeshifters and one of them had gotten stuck midway through the transformation. This would also imply that getting stuck isn't maybe a permanent thing and it's simply transient, possibly a shapeshifter who needs to get good. Others have simply just seen the creature at some point or another as well. At the intersection of Dickman and Clark Roads, a 28-year-old pregnant woman slowed her vehicle for what appeared to be a dog crossing the street one night in 2000, which breaks pattern with the 10-year hypothesis falling on sevens. This would mean that it's not really like a certified rule, it's just when it happens. She watched this mangy, gray-furred creature walk past, lit by the headlight from roughly 15 feet away. As it reached some nearby woods, she said it suddenly stood up on its hind legs and peered back at the woman. Nellie would be contacted by reporters asking what happened exactly, which she would say, "People always tell me the same thing. When they see these things, it's as if people go through a file in their brain figuring out what this creature could be, and there is no answer," she said. Seeing animals doing things outside of their purview of their characteristics is very unnerving, which she's absolutely right. You ever seen like a poodle with human eyes? It's creepy. Anyways, a possible explanation for what is going on is that a military installation is known to be in the area, which potentially may explain our last story, which resulted in a direct confrontation with the Dogman and the subsequent shot potentially hitting the ocular orbit. Back to Nellie in the meantime. Nellie would go on to say that the shape of its body was like a young male. As it stood up straight in full posture, it looked at her. She got scared and then drove off. An animal doesn't have emotions, but this animal seemed like it had emotion. It had weird eyes. The creature she would further describe was said to have German Shepherd ears and a boyish face, but more alarmingly, it appeared to be hungry. As Nellie tore off down the road, she was terrified that the creature could jump on the car at any moment. Then, in July of 2006, which again breaks pattern, a man driving to his home in Hickory Corners just north of Fort Custer told Godfrey he spotted a 6 to 7 foot tall man animal, definitely a missed opportunity to call it manimal, standing on its hind legs. As he approached, it squatted back down on all fours and dragged itself commando style into an adjacent cornfield. It looked like a large man lying dead on the side of the road, except it had fur and abnormally lanky sloth-like arms, the man told Godfrey. Then, in November of 1980, 16-year-old John Pelfrey said that he was between the Kalamazoo River and West Michigan Avenue when he spotted what he believed to be 3 Sasquatch-like creatures. "I was looking for deer," he told Battle Creek Enquirer. "First, I heard and saw one as tall as me, about 5'8" to 5'9". Then I saw 2 bigger, hairy ones. They stood about 7 or 8 feet tall. When they saw me, they took off running. I went home and got a camera, went back out and looked all over, but could find nothing. They made no noise, just a grunting sound when they took off running." Pelfrey then contacted Michigan State Police, and a report was made, but no trooper was sent to investigate. As for why there is no fossil record of the Dogman in Michigan or any concrete evidence of his existence, Godfrey pointed to several theories. She said the bones of that would appear like a large canine, and the creatures could be traveling between realms. Another man said the Dogman had actually charged him one night and leapt across the entire road before taking off. He was said to have seen a glimpse of its fur, but still to this day has no idea what it actually was. Despite all these encounters, not one has ever led to a direct confrontation with the creature, unless you count that guy being attacked in 1937, but I don't know, man. Anyways, it appears for the most part that when it runs across Homo sapiens, that is not its chosen target. One man, however, had a completely different run-in with this creature that may show an alarming change in behavior that, if it's to be believed, might mean that something will ultimately have to be done. A trucker in Michigan was driving through the Manistee National Forest back in June of 2017. He states that this would change his life forever, and likely from the looks of it, for the worse. As he was transporting material from a nearby paper mill, as he was going along, he developed an air leak in his brakes, which, as you might imagine, transporting a ton of weight in a semi-truck isn't ideal if you can't stop. He is quoted as saying, "Even if you don't believe what I'm saying is truthful, it might be something you can draw on in the future in case you ever do have an experience with the Dogman, which is an advantage I never had. And I would swear, as a Christian on the Bible, that this is 100% factual truth. So either he really does believe what he's saying, or he just really does not care about telling a lie." As he got out to check the air leak, his prerogative was not to get too far into the forest before getting this patched up. Luckily, he was able to find the air leak fairly quickly, but he said he had a bad feeling as he crawled underneath his truck to begin the repair process. As he began to work on the leak, within about 5 minutes he was able to get it fixed up, and then began to say he heard something in the woods making vocalizations. But the horrific part is it sounded somewhat human, but also not natural. As he looked around the wood line, he noted it was still very much so bright enough to see, as it was nowhere near dark yet. As he continued to feel uneasy, he would assure himself that since it was black bear country, there must just be one shadowing him or something. And actually, something to know about that feeling of unease, I guess you could call it, when you think somebody is watching you or something is watching you, it's actually because you've already seen it, you just don't know that you've seen it consciously. Now, something I've noticed about this channel is I usually make like an innocuous statement about anything, and then it spirals out of control in the comments, so I'll make this one. You don't actually have a sixth sense when it comes to someone looking at you. It just feels like you do, and that's there by nature. It's been done many, many times experimentally and shown that someone who claims they have a sixth sense when somebody's looking at them, they look at them through a camera or in the direction through a wall, that person that is being viewed has no feeling of being watched. However, in a crowded room or in the woods or on the street, you can feel someone or something watching you because your peripheral vision has already seen them, but your central vision has not. Your peripheral vision will pick up patterns and shapes that give you the feeling something is looking at you, and then you confirm it with your central vision. This is a survival technique to allow you to look around without devoting too much processing power, which is more importantly being used for your central focused vision. Someone is likely to be very upset by this information, but it is biology, and I'm actually a biologist. Humans do not have a sixth sense. Because of this, it would imply that Barger, the trucker, had actually already seen something, but just didn't know that he had seen something as he had not confirmed it with his central vision yet. After the 5 minutes taken to fix up the truck, he said the feeling continued to get worse as he climbed back into his truck and got out of there. As he did, however, he began to check his mirrors for any traffic so he could merge, but nobody was coming, so he was good to go. As he ascended the hill, he looked into his passenger side mirror and saw that it was darker than it should be. He would then make the terrible realization at this point that there was a wolf head the size of his window right there, and his windows were down. He said the thing must have been running alongside the semi at 20 to 25 miles per hour, or 32.1 to 40.2 kilometers per hour. So yeah, that's not great. As his brain began to wrap around what was happening, he said the thing was not only maintaining that speed, but it had to stoop down on two legs and look down into the cabin of the truck. From here, Barger was sitting 9 feet in the air, so this meant the creature was well over 10 feet tall because it had to look down into his cabin. The hands of the creature began to come up and scratch the windowsill and the door handles, indicating that it may have understood door handles, but even worse, it was ruining the paint on the truck, which I don't know if you've gotten a car painted recently, it was like $4,000. Anyways, adrenaline at this point would begin flooding Barger's bloodstream as he said time slowed down. He was confused, as we all would probably be by this thing, and trying to figure out what it even was. He said it was like he ended up in some alternate reality. As the creature continued to stoop down into the truck further and further while running alongside, Barger noted that it had a lot of sharp teeth, and the teeth on this thing were brilliant white. 3-inch long fangs, bottom and top. Pure black pointed ears. Its yellow eyes were darting all around the place and looking at him. The creature looked mad and determined to get him. It was sneering. It wasn't making any noises vocally. He appears to have been more alarmed by the look that it was giving him, saying there seemed to be some intelligence in the eyes, and they were telling him, I'm about to get you and there's nothing you can do about it. But the funny thing about our species is, there's absolutely something we can do about it, and we do something about it very well all the time when it comes to larger animals. Barger would rack his mind as he thought about trying to roll up the window, but decided instead to keep focused on the truck. As his mind raced, he remembered that he had a Colt 45 in his waistband, 2 zigzags perhaps as well. Barger, that's all we need. He took it out and then let fly the human response to something bigger and stronger than us. As the shots landed, he says it instantly went down. He watched it slide into the weeds, and considering it was at almost point-blank range, he thinks he had gotten it through the eye orbit. The head was apparently huge, which he then goes on to say that he wasn't panicked. Okay, sure, bro. Who are you trying to impress here? That sounds like a panic-inducing thing to me. But he says it's also the most scared he'd ever been in his life, which usually is what causes panic. Anyways, Barger assumed at this point the creature was worm food, but he had to make sure and confirm he wasn't losing his grasp on reality. A mile up the road, he was able to pull the truck back around. Barger said that as he came down the hill, after just maybe 5 minutes or so, it had completely vanished. Approaching the site, where the thing had caught some lead to the dome, he says there were 2 people standing near a Jeep, and seeing as this thing was still running around, he stopped to talk to them. They responded to him saying that, there were a few bears fighting each other, so they stopped to watch. Obviously, he didn't want them to worry, so he left, which, I don't know, man. Maybe it'd been a good thing to just let them know that there's like some 10-foot monster running around. Maybe that's just me. Because of the response that there were bears fighting in the area, this kind of alerted him that maybe there were other dogmen in the area, which kind of goes along with the idea back in 1937 of the man who was attacked by a pack of wild dogs and a dog man. Story gets a little more odd from here though, so strap in for this. Later on, after the nightmares had subsided from the event, or at least largely subsided, he says he was detained 3 months later at a scale house by state police to wait for federal authorities. Apparently when they showed up, they were intimidating and angry, which sounds pretty par for the course when dealing with the government. Have you ever been to the DMV? But they would go on to say, you killed one of our assets, which, okay, hold up. Let's say that you were a secretive government organization, right, doing sketchy things. Why would you tell some random person about your assets? Why would you let them know what it was? Why would you not just ask about it and then say, yeah, it was a bear, nothing more? But apparently old loose lips sink ships over here said it was their property and they were angry that he took it out. So then they would go on to threaten Barger, confiscated his handhelds, and then shut his bank account off. So he stopped talking about it, and I guess all of those things kind of were returned to him until he did another interview over it, threatening to cause the same issues. Yes, very good. But again, none of that really kind of makes sense as to why they would do any of that. Not to mention, if it was a government asset, like, that means they would have to track down the dogmen, because the Ottawa tribe already knew about this thing apparently for a while, so it's not like it came from the government. So that part just, it doesn't really connect, I think, in the way it's supposed to. So all of these stories have a bit of an issue, unfortunately, and circular logic is kind of used to explain why it's never been seen. The bones of these creatures have never been found, despite people likely having way worse encounters, because if Barger had a bad encounter with this thing, others would have a bad encounter with this thing. But that's explained by saying, oh, well, you know, they look like canine bones if they get taken out. But then they talk about how it has a human torso and human-like body. So that means it would be very much so a human skeleton concerning the ribcage and shoulder girdle anatomical placement. On top of this, most people just catch a glimpse of the creature and aren't actually sure as to what it was. Something standing up far away on hind legs also isn't uncommon in this area. Strap in, because people are about to hate all over this, just like they did on my Portlock video, if that's anything to go off of. But for those that get upset over it, I say this: why not make your own? That's the beauty of YouTube. You can all create. And I'm sensing a theme with this channel. It's not to debunk, but just kind of show that there's inconsistencies and typically a more natural explanation as to what might scare us out there. In the area of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Canada, it's very common to find black bears out there. Now, for most of the stories, a black bear isn't going to jump across a road or stoop down into your truck. However, a black bear is going to stand up and observe its surroundings, and from far enough away with a younger black bear in early summer, it will appear much more lithe than a more mature bear. Watching a creature jump across a road in like near darkness only to catch a glimpse of its fur doesn't indicate the dogman to me. We see there are videos of deer literally sailing over roads all the time if they are scared enough, and a deer will also charge a human defensively and then turn at the last second. And if you aren't looking at it and you're just catching it in your peripheral, it's not going to even look like a deer. So I'd also like to point out the Barger story again specifically. The ending seems way too out there, so let's take a look. First, Barger says that this encounter happened and it resulted in him nailing the thing through the eye with a round. Totally on board with that. However, he says the thing must have left the area because its body was gone even after it was wounded. So you can ask yourself, why after all this would the government agents come up to him, literally tell him that they are responsible for this thing if he took it out? Why didn't they then, why did it take them 3 months to find him? And why would they just sort of let him go? This implies they knew who he was somehow. So if they knew who he was, why would they need to wait for him to go through a scale to detain him? Why would they not just show up at his house, as clearly they would have that information? Then, why also show your hand that you're creating wretched abominations and releasing them into the woods where people camp? And this wretched abomination already apparently existed prior, like 300 years prior, even possibly before the American government was a thing. Like, none of this makes any sense once you stand back objectively and look at the information being presented. Barger says himself that it was likely a military operation, and if they don't keep it under wraps, then it won't be useful. Okay. And they keep it under wraps by immediately telling someone about it almost unprompted. Very good. I'm not saying Barger made it completely up. Well, for the sake of argument, I suppose. What it sounds like to me is he saw something, was actually scared, and the story evolved from there. Which I'm going to stop you there, commenter who's commenting. If you're arguing that that line of thought doesn't exist, ask a fisherman about how big the fish he caught was, and then get him to tell the story a few times. The fish goes from like 6 inches to 9 inches to over a foot long to 1.5 feet, and he had to struggle for over 15 minutes reeling it in. Storytelling can naturally evolve, more so when it's just that, a story. Events get muddied or added onto. And I think what he saw was likely a bear that may have given chase to his truck once he got in it, as black bears who are lean enough can actually run at a pace of over 30 miles per hour, and likely had begun trying to pull itself into the truck. I'm not sure about it stooping down from a 10-foot high vantage point. I know some are probably pretty upset by this explanation, but we are talking about a black furred animal that can stand on its hind legs and raise itself up to look around. That could literally, in the whole human body thing, again, I hate to be this way about it, but if you take a bear and it has mange, which happens all the time. In fact, somebody just even said earlier in their interview that it was mangy fur. It will kind of look creepily human if it stands upright. And also, tracks that bears leave behind, they kind of all somewhat look like Bigfoot tracks. That's all I'm saying, man. Anyways, we have this black furred animal that can stand on its hind legs to raise itself up and look around. It can run at 20 miles per hour, has claws, ears that point straight up. I mean, I know black bears have rounded ears, but their ears point straight up, and sharp fangs. I'm just not convinced this isn't a misidentified bear, which happens all the time. I would say once again, however, the absence of evidence does not indicate the evidence of absence. Bears being common, but piercing blue eyes and yellow eyes standing in a tree line 7 feet up, which has been reported by people before, is quite alarming. But I'd also say people who are not familiar with wildlife would likely tend to think a gray wolf from a bit of distance in a tree line would be taller than what they think it should be, and then attribute it to being something that they don't know what it is. Ultimately, a lot of these stories do not really seem to confirm that there is a Dogman in Michigan. I say a lot because some are still harder to explain than others, which could lend credence and believability to these tales. Always remember, though, mass hysteria is something that can take grip of people and hold them tightly to beliefs, because the last thing I want to bring up before rounding this thing out is the statement made earlier, how as of late the Dogman of Michigan has begun to gain traction. Well, I say as of late because really it's been like the last 35 years. In 1987, a disc jockey by the name of Steve Cook recorded a song about the creature and its reported sightings called The Legend. This was supposed to be an April Fool's joke, but the song would then prompt a bunch of people to begin calling in, discussing what they have seen as well. Interestingly, Steve claims to have been unaware of the existence of the Dogman, but made the song from his imagination. After people began calling and explaining what they had seen, Steve would maintain his skepticism about the actual existence of the Dogman, saying, "I'm tremendously skeptical because I've sort of seen the way folklore becomes built from the creation of this song to what it's turned into. But I do believe people who think they saw something really did see something. I also think the Dogman provides them with an avenue to explain what they couldn't explain for themselves." Later, a video was actually made using film grain effects that you can get in editing software nowadays that appears to show the Dogman in the 1970s as a few friends were recording themselves snowmobiling and driving through the woods. This, however, would be confirmed a hoax, and actually Steve was involved in its creation. So between the hoaxes, such as like one woman who gave her testimony on it, she says that earlier in life, she saw a lizard person outside her window of her trailer. It's just, the stories seem too good to be true. And the complete lack of evidence, I'm just gonna have to go with Steve on this one and say it's likely an idea used to explain what people don't understand when it comes to weird things that they see in nature, and that they just aren't used to seeing. Remember, nature is weird, but our mind's ability to come up with things to explain what we just don't understand is even more strange. But anyhow, I want to thank you guys for watching. So I want to hear what you guys think. Do you think the Michigan Dogman is true? Have you seen it? Well, in 2027, as stated, if this channel, I don't know, somehow reaches like 1 million subs, I'll go up there and actually look for it. And you better believe I'm gonna be strapped, because you never know. Like, why not go up there completely strapped and in Mjolnir armor and all that good stuff? And if I do find that thing, I'm 100% stuffing it and putting it in my office. If you enjoyed, then leaving a like is always appreciated. Subscribing is a great way to stay up to date on when I post. But that does it for me. Thank you for watching and listening, and I will see y'all in the next one.